Hey guys, it's Sam for Digital Meat, and in this RealFlow For Cinema 4D tutorial we're going to be taking a look at Wetmaps. This isn't something we've covered before, so yeah, we're going to be looking at that. As you can see, I've got a scene already set up. I've got a scene tree, I've got an emitter in there. This emitter I've actually animated. I've also set up this object here with a collider tag and a volumetric tag. And I've got a K volume in there, so any particles that go outside of the bounds of this box will die. And I've also got a gravity daemon in there as well. If you've got no clue what I'm talking about whatsoever, I suggest you go back and look at my other RealFlow For Cinema 4D tutorials. You can find them on digitalmeat.uk on the tutorials page, and you can filter by the RealFlow For Cinema 4D category. And you can also see them on my YouTube channel, Digital Meat, and they'll be under a playlist called Realflow For C4D. Okay, so with that out of the way, what are Wetmaps? So here's a crude example. It's not the prettiest mesh in the world, but it'll give you an idea of what we're trying to get at here. That's if media player wants to work. Let's try that again. There we go. So obviously you've got the mesh here. You've got the particles coming out. It's been meshed, but the Wetmaps are this residue that is leaving behind on this wall here. And as we go along, you can see that where it's fresher, it's got more of its colour, and the longer that the Wetmap is present, the less colour it adds. It starts to dry out. So if we leave it going for a while, like I said, pretty messy mesh here, but you can see this starting to fade now as it dries. So that's what we're going to be looking at today, Wetmaps, and how to achieve that. Let's have another quick look. Yeah, nice and red there. It starts drying off. Great. So we can move this out of the way now and actually have a look at our scene. So this emitter I've already animated, basically. So what I've done is I've animated its position. So it's doing this. And then I've animated its speed on the emitter, so it goes to 0, animates to 0, and then we're done. Okay, so how do we create the Wetmap? So what we do is we go to the collider tag, and we have this Wetmap tab here. So we've got this checkbox, enable Wetmap. So we're basically saying, yep, we can generate a Wetmap if we want. And we've got the resolution here. So this is the resolution of the texture that we're going to be creating. So this resolution is in pixels, and the Wetmap is always square. It's always the power of 2. Filter loops. This is where you can determine how often the internal blur filter should be applied. So if you're thinking it's looking too sharp or something like that, you can actually blur that out. And obviously filter strength is how strong that blur effect is. Pixel strength. RealFlow uses 256 grey shades to calculate wet-dry textures. The range goes from 0, which is black, to 255, which is white. If you limit the tone range, the amount of particle marks will decrease and all that kind of thing. So I suggest leaving that alone. You want the full range. Aging. Some materials dry much faster than others, and this behaviour can be simulated. So lower settings make the wet patterns last longer, and higher settings obviously dry quicker. The one thing that sort of annoys me about this is even at a value of 0, which is the lowest you can go, you can't go into negative values, I don't think. No, 0 is the lowest. 0 is actually the setting that I had on this simulation, and as you can see, if it actually wants to play, even though it's on 0, it does dry out, which is quite annoying. I'd suggest that maybe if you've got a value of 0, you'd want this to be a permanent thing, and then anything above that will dry, but just extremely slowly, like 0.1 or something like that. Because if you had something like, I don't know, say paint, and you threw that up against a wall, yeah, it might dry out, but that would be to do with its reflectance channel. You could just animate its reflectance coming down or something like that, but the paint itself would stay there, if you know what I mean. So yeah, it would be nice if 0 was actually it didn't dry out. Anyway, less of my moaning. That's pretty much what everything does in the Wetmap tab. So you're thinking, okay, well, it's checked on and you've got all these settings up. So, you know, what's the deal? Well, that's not enough. Just to say that we're going to allow Wetmaps is, it's not enough. So, as you can see, so what we need to do is actually create this texture that it's talking about. So, I'm actually going to create a new material, and I'm going to call this Wetmap. Wetmap. Okay. Cool. And I'm going to turn off the reflectance for now. And in the color channel, I'm going to go to texture, use this drop down and go all the way down here. And we've got Realflow Wetmap. Great. So now the Realflow Wetmap is in there. It means that it can actually create a wet map from the interaction of particles. So basically what happens is when your particles hit this object, i.e. this collider, Wetmaps is checked on, it will write a wet map to this sort of shader and it will save it out as well when you cache. I think it does it on the fly as well, but we can test that theory. This though has to be, this material has to be on the object that you've got, that you want to record wet maps. So for the time being, I'm going to take this white texture off and then put this wet map material on our steps and rewind to the beginning and just sort of see what happens. Okay, well it's definitely hitting our object there and it appears not a lot is happening, which is quite disappointing, and there could be several reasons for that. Okay, we've got our Realflow wet map in here. Great, everything's, you know, as it needs to be, and if we go to our wet map display, it'll give us the range of color it's going to use. All of this can be left alone, but if we go down to editor, we need to check this animate preview if we want to see this working in the viewport. So let's give that a go. So we're doing that, and oh dear, that doesn't seem very accurate in any way whatsoever. So what's happening is the particles are hitting this back wall here, but the wetness value has been transferred to all these polys here. Some are getting it, some aren't. And there's a very good reason for that. It's to do with the UV of this object. So I'm not going to do anything fancy, but if I select the UV of our steps, well, I don't even need to do that. If I select the steps themselves and then go to BP UV edit, it'll open up this window. And these are the UVs of our object. And if I choose, say, this and drag it out, you can see that it's overlaying all the other UVs. So that's not going to be very helpful at all in any way. And that's exactly why we're getting this horrible duplication of our wet map on all these different polys, because they're all laid over each other. So we need to sort that out first. Like I said, I'm going to keep it really, really simple. So I'm going to go to our UV polygon mode and then just go over here and press Control A. So we've got a hold of all of them. And then I'm going to the optimal mapping and I'm just going to select optimal cubic and press apply. So now all the UVs, all the UV polygons are now laid out, but there's no overlapping. They've all got their own UV space. They're all separated out there. So that should do us. So let's get back to our other view. There we go. And let's give this another whirl and see what happens. So now you can see they're actually getting a more accurate result there. Excellent. One problem though. If we look in here, go to our editor and make sure the texture preview size, let's put it up to say like 1K, just to make sure that we're actually viewing it at the right sort of, you can see that it's not particularly, the resolution is not particularly high. I mean, we can see the pixels here. So we can actually go into our settings for the wet map in our collider tag and change this resolution. So we've got 256 here. I suggest that you stick to 256, 512, you know, power of 2 stuff. I'm going to put it to 1024. So that's a 1K texture. So let's see what this looks like now. Yep, we've got a lot more accuracy going on now. Oh, excuse me. I think I just pressed the X button. Yeah, I did. Yeah, so it's a lot better than it was. And you could even crank that up if you wanted to something like 2K. Something else you should note as well. Okay, so we're getting a result now where our particles are actually hitting it, and you know, we're getting this result and pretty good resolution. You don't want to go too high because for every frame of this, it's going to create a texture for us to play back, and you'll see that in a moment. But what about these filter loops and the filter strength? Well, let's crank our filter strength up to something like 0.5 and see how that affects our texture. Now you can see the edge is much more smoothed out, so are these, so maybe that's worth considering. Yeah, I think I'm gonna do that, but there's something else you should note as well. I'm gonna bring this filter back down, and I'm just gonna let this run out for a bit. Okay, yeah, brilliant, brilliant. Let's get to the end of it. Okay, so that's done that. I'm going to change the display mode to Corralled Shading and come out of that mode. Here we go. So now we can see. You can see that there's a black line that runs along here, and you may be thinking, well, it's probably because the particles haven't got in there, and that may be the case. It might be a collider shape. I can tell you in my case, my collider shape, if I go to display and turn on collision geometry, so I can actually view it in a meaningful way, turn off all the lights just so I can see it's, there we go, that's better. That's another thing. I wish they'd give their collision geometry some kind of luminant material, so it doesn't matter what lights are on and off, it always displays like this. That would be very handy. So just you know, next limit if you're listening, little idea. So yeah, we can actually hone the shape of our collision shape if it's not sort of close enough, but I've already tried this and it didn't seem to make too much difference when it came to that black line. So, I mean, we can do it again. We can go to the volume tag. We can say, okay, the cell size is, say, 2 instead of 4. Let's just do it 3. Surface offset is 1.5 centimeters. Let's make it 0.5 centimeters, so it's super close. Rewind. Now we're really, really close. So, let's go back to this and turn our collision geometry off and see what kind of result we get. And as you can see, we're still getting that gap. It may not be as evident. In fact, it's a lot better. Yeah, it's a little bit better. So maybe that is it. Maybe it's our collision shape that needs to be honed. But here we can see that it's not actually getting in there, even though the particles are running along this pretty closely as well, especially there. So that's obviously not our problem. That's not what's happening. So let's go back to our volume tag, and I'm just going to go back to the values that I had, and hopefully we're back to where we were. And let's turn our lights back on as well, and let's turn off our collision geometry there. Okay, so if we go back to the beginning, there we go. Yeah, that big black mark's back, and I think I might have gone one too many in terms of going back too far. Let's check our wet map. Yeah, 124 filter loops, 1111. No, okay, so that's back to what it should be. But yeah, we're getting this line again and all the rest of it. But this is where the filter strength could come in and save us a little bit, because by blurring out the edges of our map, we could actually save ourselves a little bit. So let's have a look at that. You can see it up here as well. We're getting this like sort of this. So let's put this up to 0.5. Play it again, and you can see that it's a much smoother transition now. I mean, even if there's a little gap in there, oh, it seems to have got this rather nicely as well. So that blur can really help you out in certain circumstances. And I think I'm going to leave it like that. I'm going to leave it at 0.5, I think. Okay, that's good. Okay, so that's how we actually create the maps. But we're going to have to cache it. And we're going to have to cache our particle simulation as well. So to make sure that we can get, you know, a decent result and a decent mesh and everything, what I'm going to do is actually go to my scene, go to the solver, make sure that we're using the GPU, which we are. Go to the cache. First I want to go to the fluid actually. Fluid. The resolution's at 30. I'm going to crank that up to 40. And I think that should do it. So I'm going to go back to the scene, go to cache, and I'm going to say cache simulation. Now, usually when we've done this in the past, it's cached our particles, but in this case, it's not only going to cache our particles, it's going to cache the wet maps as well. And I'll show you what I mean by going to my documents folder. So if I go to documents, Realflow For C4D, go to the cache. The folder's empty at the moment. Let's cache the simulation. It's having a good old think about it. And you can see that it's creating these, I think these are alembic files actually, ABCs. But you can also see that they're creating these wet maps as well. And here's a little preview of it up here. So it's creating these square maps, and you'll notice that, you know, as it gets whiter and whiter, you can see it's the shape of our UVs that we sorted out earlier. So that's going along rather nicely. Okay, it's done. So if I rewind this back to the beginning now and play, great, it's cached our stuff, and we should be able to scrobble back and forth, and you can see it fading slightly there at the end. So jobs are good, and really. Just another thing to note, I'm just going to come out of this view and go into the side view. Because I affected the collider, I just want to make sure none of our particles are leaking into the middle of our object, and everything seems to be fine and dandy there. Okay, so now we've got our wet maps. How exactly are we going to use them? Well, this wet map material that we got in here, with this, you know, this Realflow wet map shader in the color is going to do us no good. So what I'm going to do is actually remove this. I'm going to clear that. And, well, what color do I want our fluid to be? Well, I suppose first things first, let's get a mesher in there so it at least looks sort of half decent, if you know what I mean. So let's go and select the mesher. We've got a mesh in there now. We've already pre-calculated our particles, so they're all done. But let's get to somewhere around here and click on mesher and just say build mesh. So what this will do is build mesh on this frame. So that's what the mesh looks like at the moment. It's not too bad actually. It's on low. I think I'm going to keep it on low for the purpose of this tutorial, just so we can speed things up. It's on 8 centimeters. I may want to lower that, but I'm just going to smooth it out a little bit and build mesh again. And that has smoothed it out quite a lot actually. That's not too bad. Let's turn off the particles just for the time being, just so I can see what's going on. That's not bad. That's alright. Let's get to another stage and choose our mesher again and choose it. Okay, it's looking a little bit ropey here. But I've already done a tutorial on the mesher. Like I said, you can go back and have a look at that. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we're talking about the wet maps really. Yeah, do you know what? I'm going to leave it at that. And now I'm going to cache the mesh as well. So if we go back to our scene, we don't need to cache simulation. We just need to cache meshes. Okay, the mesh is cached. I just want to point out the reason that I'm doing this, caching the mesh, is because when we come to render, if we just got particles in the scene, you're just going to see the wet map and it won't look, you know, quite right. So, okay. So let's create a new material and call this fluid. Okay. And let's make it, let's make this translucent. And I've got a good reason for doing that as well. I did a tutorial a while back and someone was asking me how I managed to get the translucency. In this little thing that I played a minute ago, I just did it as a solid colour because I didn't want to take the render to take a million years. But let's make a translucent fluid while we're here. So let's turn the colour off, let's turn the reflectance off and turn the transparency on. And if you go back to the reflectance tab, even though it's off, it's got this transparency here. So let's get rid of this default specular. This transparency can't be removed because by using transparency, it also needs a reflective value in there. Well, they've called it transparency, but it's got a reflection strength, and rightly so, because if you go into the transparency, you've got a refraction preset, and that's mathematically attached to the index of reflection as well. So let's just choose water for this. So now you can see we've got this refraction index here of 1.333. We've got total internal reflections. All of this stuff you can leave alone. Let's apply this to our mesh as well so we can kind of get an idea of what's going on. So let's apply that to the fluid. Doesn't look great in the viewport. What's the absorption color? I'm going to go full red so it looks like some kind of wine, and I'm going to bring its we'll bring that down to about 85 maybe. We'll see. We'll keep it at that. You can see the colours changed here. And then you've got this absorption distance. So if I render this now, so you can have a look at it, that looks awful. And the reason for that is, yes, there's a very good reason for this actually. Let me just select my lights. I think if I go to the details, they're being shown. Yeah, that's right. So they're being shown in the render, and I don't want that. And they're also shown as solid in the viewport. And do I want them shown in reflection? No, I don't. These are PBR lights, by the way. So let's have a look at that. Okay, so that's a lot better. And I think what I'm also going to do is change this HDR that I've got in the scene. It's not very good, so I'm going to go to my content browser and go to search HDRI, and there's one that's pretty good that I like to use. Where is it? Yeah, this will do, this one. So we'll put that in. Okay, there we go. And I think my sky object was revolved as well. So let's get that back to 0 and see how that looks and give it another render. Yeah, it's okay. But as you can see, the actual translucency of the fluid is a little bit weak. So let's get back to our transparency in our material, and I'm going to put this absorption distance right down to 30, so you can see it's a lot darker. So what it's saying is light gets absorbed at a lower distance. Okay, so let's give that a go. It should be a deeper red now. Yeah, there you go. It looks like Ribena or something like that. So we could even go lower if we wanted to. So let's go 20 and see what that does. Okay, I think that'll do for our purposes. Yeah, I'm quite happy with that. No complaints from me. Yeah, that's good. Okay, we can zip this back up then. For the time being, what I might do is, just so we can see it in the viewport, is actually do this, and we can just turn the color channel off when we need to. Okay, so there's our fluid. Like I said, the mesh isn't particularly pretty, but I just want you guys to get an idea of what I'm doing. Okay, back to the Wetmap material. So if we go back to this material now, which is already on here, we can do the same kind of thing. So let's turn color off. Let's turn transparency on. And if I remember rightly, we had an index of refraction of water, and our absorption color was full red here, and this was down at 85. And I think our absorption distance was 20. So let's just check that with this. Yeah, it was 20. Good. So now we've got our material, and I'm just going to turn on the color channel and put it full red like I did with the other one, and turn off transparency. Now the problem with this is the whole object is fully red, and we don't want that. So what we're going to do is use the alpha channel. If we go down to the alpha, turn it on, we've got image alpha and soft. That's absolutely fine. So now we need to go find our textures. So what we want to do is Go to our Cinema 4D cache, which should be in your documents. You'll see all these Alembic files here, which you can totally ignore, and the Mesher Alembics as well. And then get down to where your Wetmap starts. Select the first one and say open. It will say, do you want to, it's not at the project path. I'm going to say no, it can remain there. And you can see that it's now cut out a load of stuff. But what we want to do is go into this, go into animation, and as you can see it says movie start at 0, movie end at 0. I'm going to say calculate. So now it's loaded in the Wetmap, and as you can see, because I'm doing it in the alpha channel, it's cut everything out, but it's using this colour. So that's great. Let's have a look. Let's scrub through. Okay, well the Wetmap seemed to be working, but the only other problem we've got is that there's sort of nothing behind it, if you know what I mean. It's kind of cut it out, but there's nothing there. And the reason for that is we need to get the white material that was originally on our object and put it back on. And this order matters. If I put it back on now, there's no Wetmaps. But if I drag the Wetmap material on top of this, so this is how Cinema 4D reads materials when you stack them. It's from left to right. So anything to the right is going to be on top. Okay? So we've got original white material, and then we've got this alphaed Wetmap material as well now. So as that spits out, the Wetmap is applied, and jobs are good. And so let's give that a render and have a look what it looks like. Well, we've got our Wetmap and we've got our fluid. It's all good, right? Okay, great. Okay, so we can go back into our Wetmap now, and we can turn off the color and turn back on the transparency. And this has got all our absorption, settings and stuff in there. Water, we've got this red. It's all good. And we can do the same thing for our translucency here in this material. So now our mesh and our Wetmap should have the same material and should be translucent. And there we go. Excellent. So now I'm just going to check this sky as well, because our reflections seem a little bit dull. So I'm going to go to sky, seen by camera. I'm also going to go to the, let's have a look. So where's our light? Yeah, that's not too bad. Our light's around the right side of the model at least. So that should be okay. I'm going to go back to the sky, turn off the camera. Let's have a look at our render settings. So we're on physical, it's 15%, that'll do. Yeah, nice big output. Yeah, so there you go. Let's render that. The reason this probably looks weird actually is because there is no, even though this fluid's moving, there's no motion blur. And that's because if you go to the, where is the motion blur now? Is it scene? Oh, it'll be in the mesher actually. If you go to mesher, mesh, motion blur strength, it's up, it's 100%, and then you've got to go into your render settings, go down to physical and turn on motion blur, which it is. Although motion blur won't render when you render to this view, like this, you've actually got to render to the picture viewer. So what I'll do is go to output, I'm going to lock the ratio between these two values, and let's say 800, just so it renders nice and quick, and that should be it. So render to picture viewer, and we should at least get an idea of the motion. Yeah, you can see the motion blur is calculating now. There we go. Yep, and it looks like there's a lot more movement in there. Maybe something else we can do if it's not already in there. Yeah, we've got ambient occlusion. Good stuff. And actually, for a still frame like this, you could probably turn off all my lighting and have our sky generate some global illumination. So let's give that a go. Yeah, that could do with some more light being pushed into the scene, definitely. But that's not really the point of this. The point of this was to, show you guys how our wet maps are going to be working. Let me just turn off the transparency so we can see it in the viewport again. Yeah, so it's all about the transparency. Sorry, not the transparency, the wet maps, and then fading away as time goes on. But like I said, I wish that maybe that a value of 0 for these wet maps would have them stay there. That'd be a nice option to have. Anyway, guys, that's it. For my viewers on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that bell to get tutorial notifications. You can also check me out at digitalmeat.uk, where you can filter my tutorials by category. You can also follow me on social media, links in the description and the footer of my website. If you'd like to support Digital Meat, this can be done via Patreon or the support page on the website. But if you'd like to support Digital Meat and get extra tutorial content, you can purchase the Prime membership in the store at digitalmeat.uk. For winding down, I have a second channel called Beef Doctor, where I do game streams. Link in the description and the footer of my website. Okay, thanks for watching, guys. Bye!